Hi guys, and welcome to my 7th Hibernate tutorial. And in today's tutorial I'm going to show you guys how to actually write Hibernate Curie using the Hibernate Curie language to select the data from a particular table or select the columns from the particular table. Now to begin this tutorial, first I'm going to show you my games table which we generated in our previous tutorials, and I'm going to use this exact same table. And this table has 4 columns. The first column is ID, second column is name, space, and type. Now to have more descriptive understanding of the table and what are the data types we use for the table, let's say describe and say games and run this, and there we get the description of our table. We have the ID column, which is of number type, name of varchar2 type, space of number type, and type of variable character2 type. Now let's begin our programming. Let's create a new project, new Java project, and let's call this project as let's call this project as Hibernate Curie tutorial. Alright, now let's say finish, and let's copy the configuration file from any of our previous programs since I'm using the same database. Alright, so let me copy the configuration file from any of the previous programs which has its name as, alright, let's copy it from primary key program. Let's copy this Hibernate configuration file from our last tutorial program, alright, and paste it in our Hibernate Curie language source folder. So let's say, and go to paste, and there's paste over here, and now it's pasted. Now the next thing I need to copy is my games Pojo class. Alright, so let's see, in my games project there's supposed to be a games Pojo class. Now I don't have a single games Pojo class because this project actually used discriminator values and discriminator columns, but we can use this project. Alright, games, so copy this, or just close this up, copy this games dot Pojo class and paste it in our Hibernate Curie source folder. Paste. Alright, it generates what you call default package for us, and in our default package we have the games.java. Alright, now we can actually check our project class if it's correct, and now see our project class. We have public class games, and it has ID, name, type, and space, and we can check it at our database which has ID, name, type, ID, name, space, and type. Alright, ID, name, space, and type, and here it's ID, type, name, type, and space. Alright, and then I have the setter and getter methods for them. Alright, and in my configuration file which I copied just now, I have connection to the database, that is driver class, URL, dialect, then the username and the password. Then I'm setting auto commit to false, and then I have the SQL 3 properties for showing the SQL statements generated. This is for showing the SQL statements, and this is for showing them in format, and this is for showing the comments for the SQL statements which are displayed in my console. And then the mapping resource file won't be student.html.xml. I need to change that, so let's leave it empty for now. Now let's see the Hibernate mapping file for the games project, and let's see what we can copy from it. Alright, so this is the Hibernate mapping file from the games project. So let me copy this, and let me copy the DGD2. There will be slight changes in this program on the mapping file, since this mapping file is I used the discriminator columns, but in this program, in the games program, we used that was tutorial for explaining the discriminator columns, but in our present program Curie tutorial I don't need to use any discriminator columns, so I have to slightly change my mapping file from my games, the one which I copied. So like right now, let's say click on my source folder and say new other, and let's create a new XML file called Hibernate mapping file. So let's say Hibernate dot Hibernate mapping.xml. Then let's say it's finished, and now let's paste the paste the content which we just copied from the game's Hibernate mapping file. Now I don't need discriminator column. Alright, so remove discriminator column, and I don't have a discriminator value, so let's remove this too. So these are, and I don't need any subclasses. Alright, remove this too. Now check our project class. In our project class we have, we have let's close this. We have ID, name, type, and space. Alright, so I have to add a new property for the type. Alright, because type was the discriminator column and we didn't specify it as a property. We specified it as a discriminator column. Alright, so next thing I need is I have ID, space, name, and the third property or the fourth property which I need to specify is a type. Alright, I can check it out from here. It's going to be type. Okay, and the column name is going to be type. Alright, and then the type of this is going to be, let's check what's our type of its variable character too. So I can use a string with the small letter s. Alright, so this is done. Alright, and now our mapping file is finished. Now the next thing I need to do is to write the client code. So let's say a new class, and let's say run HQL Curie, and let's say it's going to have public static void main. Alright, it's going to have public static void main, and say finish, and there you go. I have my run HQL Curie program. Now before I go to that, there's some things I need to do. I need to export my Hibernate jars in my Hibernate Curie tutorial project. So let's say build path, configure build path, and there add external jars. Now alright, select all and press open. Okay, and say okay. Now in real time you don't need actually to export these jars, import these jars every time you use a project and add them manually. You actually can use Maven, which actually does our job of getting these jars automatically. Probably in the coming tutorials I'll show you how to use the Maven. Maven, it's a project management tool, and how we can use it to get these Hibernate jars or the jars we require for our project automatically, rather than we downloading the distribution folder and searching the jars and adding them manually. So Maven does the job for us, and I'll be showing you how in the coming tutorials. For now, let's start off with writing the code of our project. As usual, there will be like 4 lines of code which will remain the same. Configuration, alright, and the CFG equals to new configuration. Alright, new configuration, and the next thing is going to be I have to configure. Okay, I didn't specify my mapping file in my Hibernate configuration file, so let's specify that hibernate.hbm.xml. Alright, save this, Ctrl S, and then let's go to our run HQL Curie and say cfg.configure, and in my configure I have to specify my configuration file. So let's say hibernate.cfg.xml. And then the next next thing I need to do is I have to use the configuration object to create the session factory object. So let's say session factory sf equals to cfg.build session factory exactly, and then I need to use a session factory object to create the session object. So let's say session, alright, and session s is equals to sf.openSession, alright, and then the next thing we need to create is a transaction which is created using the session object. Transaction, alright, tx equals to s.begin transaction. Alright, now our 4 lines of code is generated. Now let's start writing. Now the new part of the program begins over here. What I'm doing right now is I'm going to write a Hibernate query rather than an SQL query. Now Hibernate query and SQL query differ in some particular ways. Let's say, now for writing the query, first of all I need to create a query object. So let's say query, which is from my org.hibernate package, but not javax.management. Alright, so this is the query interface, and let's say query q equals to, and now query is always created using the session object. Alright, so session object, my session object is s dot create query. Now see, as you can see, like create query is used for creating the Hibernate query. If you want to write an SQL query, you can use the create SQL query method and pass the SQL query inside the string and run the SQL query. But in this example, I'm showing you guys how to write the Hibernate query, so I'm going to use the create query method rather than the create SQL query methods. The create query method uses the HQL language, that is Hibernate query language, but the create SQL query method uses the SQL, the general SQL language. Now let's use the create query, and now the query writing in Hibernate query language is pretty simple. Unlike the SQL query where we used to get the data from, we used to write the data query to get the data from our database table. In this, we write the query to get the data from our class Pojo class object. Alright, so let's write the query. Now, as when I said, when we write the query to get the data from our Pojo class object, it is pretty understandable that I don't need to have to know my table name or have any table name. So let's say the query is going to be like select. Alright, S stands here for my Pojo class object. From, now here I'm going to let's say G games, because I'm using the games table now. Now here from, I'm not going to specify my table name, rather I'm going to specify my class name, which starts with a capital G and has small case over. Alright, if I write my games in all cap locks, it won't understand because I'm not referring to the SQL query. In SQL, the query is case insensitive. Whether you write the table name in caps or small cases, it doesn't matter. But here in this Hibernate query language, class name, specifically in Java, we have the first letter of the class name is going to be cap locks. So this name has to be exactly like this, G with the caps and AMES, which is my Pojo class. If I write it with cap locks, it won't work because there's no class with having name as capital ANGAMES. There doesn't exist a class with all cap locks. My class name is with one capital G and rest of the letters small cases. So this refers to my class name. It does not refer to my table name, so it is case sensitive and it has to be exactly as your Pojo class name. Now let's create from games, and games is a class, so I need an object of that class, so let's say games G. And now let's ended with a semicolon. Alright, now the next thing I need to do is the Curie object over here, which we created, generates a list object. Alright, list of the result which it gets. So now I need to create a list so that I can store the data which is available for me from the Curie object. So let's create a list of type. Now the Curie which I generated, or the Curie object, is going to generate data for me which is of the games object, right? See here, I'm selecting the games object, so it has to generate data for me which is of games object, which is of type games object. So list of games. Alright, so it's going to generate the list of games object for me. Let's call it G1 equals to, and I said Curie object gives me the list of the what you call selected data, or the result, or the values which I'm going to get. So I have to use Curie object, and there I have something called list. And if you see, alright, alright, I have the list. I have the Curie.list. It's not showing any description for the list. Alright, so Curie.list actually gives me the list object list and stores what I call returns. Curie object gives me a list. Now I'm keeping that list in my list which I just created, and for the list I need to export what you call add java.util package. So let's say import java.util. Alright, and the next thing which comes now is, now my list is loaded in my list of games, that's list G1. Now I simply have to print it. Alright, now let's say system.out.println. I'm writing this statement because I want to show you guys that here itself, at the place where I load my list, where the Curie object list is loaded in my list, here itself the data is loaded. The data is not fetched when I actually call the get methods, but it is rather fetched when I generated what it called Curie. So that's why let's say a printout statement, data loaded here. Alright, and now the next thing I need to go is to print the data which is loaded in my list. For that I need to first run a loop. Alright, and let's say my loop is going to be games G2, which has to be in G1. Alright, and then I have to specify, how did it become system? That should be for. Alright, for is going to be games G2 belongs in G1. I'm going to have I need to display the data. So sysO control space, and then I write G2 dot get ID. Alright, and then again sysO control space, and let's say G2 dot get name. Alright, sysO control space, and let's say G2 dot get name. Get name's finished. Alright, get space, and then finally get type. System.sysO and space, and let's say G2 dot get type. Alright, now let's this is pretty much what we needed to do. And now the next thing I need to do is close the session. Alright, and end the transaction, flush the session, and then close the session. So as a flush, right, and then as that close. And let's save this program and let's run this up. Run as Java application. Save everything, and let's see, it should work fine. There you go, it's working perfectly. I have my ID 1, game name NFS, space it takes 500 MB, and the game type is normal. And I have ID 2, which is Ninja Gaiden, space is 7000 MB, it's a role-playing game. And then I have the third game, which is named Tekken 600 space arcade, and see the data was loaded before I actually got the data. And this is the Curie generated, is selected. Select G from games G and select similar, select everything from here. Now the second way of I can write the same Curie is I can write select student. The second way I can write this Curie is I'm going to show you guys how it's done the second way. Alright, so let's maximize, or this is the console, right? Alright, so the second way, let's first comment this out, so when I present the program code in my blog, you people can actually copy the code. So let's say Curie Q equals to s dot create, and sorry, not create filter, but create. Alright, create Curie. Alright, and inside this Curie there's going to be from games, and that's it. This small part will do the job for us, and if you want to check it out, I can run this program again. Okay, I missed a semicolon. Save, run as Java application, and save all, and let's see what we get now. And see, we get the same result as we got the last time. So you can either use this or either use this Curie or either use this Curie. The result is the same. Now the second part of the tutorial is that in this method where we generated the Curie, it's understandable that if I want to display two columns, that is ID column or name column, I just need to print the system.out.println the ID and name, and I don't need these two statements. If I comment out these two statements, it will only get or fetch these two columns for me, but it's actually loading the whole table, the entire table, even if I require the two columns. That is, if I had this scenario that from the games table I only needed to print the ID of the game and name of the game, but I don't need to print space of space and type columns. But even in this scenario, if I run this query right now, it's going to load the entire table. Alright, and then it's going to display the name, ID and name from this entire table. It's going to display two columns, but loading the entire table is not appropriate for me when I need to get only two columns out of it. In this scenario, it's okay because my table right now contains only 4 columns. But imagine a scenario where you have a very huge table containing many columns. So in that scenario, it's actually not good to actually get and load the entire table and entire columns when we require to represent only few columns. For that, we have the another way we can actually get the data, and I'm going to show you exactly now in the same program. Alright, so for this, alright, I need to create a query. Let's call this query as Q2. Query Q2 equals to s.create query. Alright, create query, and this time I'm going to write in my query what columns I need to select. Alright, so I say select G dot. Alright, G is my class object, as you people might have guessed. G dot ID, I need to select. I need to select G dot name. Sorry, name is going to get small cases. Alright, and there's supposed to be comma in here. Alright, G dot ID and G dot name, and I'm not going to select anything extra out of it. Alright, just two values. Now let's say then from. Alright, I need to actually write the from games, which is the class name, so capital G and all small cases, from games G. Alright, which is games is a class, so it need to have an object, and then let's say this is semicolon. Now The next thing I need to write is an object to actually hold this data, the list. As you know, I explained you previously that the Curie always generates a list of what you call fetched values or the data or the columns. So let's create a list. Let's call this L1, alright, equals to Q2 dot list. Alright, now what do we need next? Now this time I cannot actually load my columns in my games table, because games project class actually contains 4 columns, but in my present scenario I'm only selecting 2 columns. So I have to create a temporary object and store these values in that temporary object so that I can fetch them. Because if I store them in my games table, it still raises the possibility of me trying to get the other columns which I'm not loading, and those will not be displayed. And so for that purpose I cannot directly get my list, create a list of games object. Rather I have to use another object rather than games object, that is the normal object, and load the columns which I'm loading in that object. Alright, so for that I have to create something called iterator object. Alright, java.util package iterator, and it's not any type. Alright, iterator I. Alright, let's say equals to L1 dot iterator. The next thing I need to write is the while loop for actually parsing through the data or going through the data and displaying them each record. I dot has next method actually returns true. It returns a Boolean value, so I can use it in my while loop. If the data exists, it returns true. If it does not exist, it returns a false. So it has next. Now I have to write the code. Alright, so I have to first create an object array, okay, and the object array of type obj, and let's say equals to object of array, typecast as object of array, and then I have to say I dot next. Alright, you can see what I dot next stands for. I dot next returns the next element in the iteration. Alright, so we are going to get the next element in the iteration, and then I have to load the data which I'm going to get. I'm going to get ID and name. ID of type integer, name is of type string. So let's say integer or int ID equals to. Alright, let's typecast the object integer. See, this is what happened over here is in my object I have stored the record. Alright, my record is loaded in my object. Now from my object I have to get my values of the record, each record, and store them in some separate variables and display them. And the object means the records or the values in my object does not have a type, there's an object type. Therefore I have to typecast it into my required type and then get them. So how I'm going to get them is I have to say obj and object array, and then now the number over here refers to the first one over here. This is referred to as 0, this is referred to as 1, and if there was one more column it would have been 2. So I'm going to select the first column, so it's going to be 0. If it was my second column, it was going to be 1. If it was my third column, it was going to be 2, and so on. Alright, now the next thing, I need to create a string name. Alright, typecast it to string, the capital S, string, and obj as it is my second column. Alright, that is g.name, this is the second one, this is first one, so I have to say 1. Alright, and now the next thing I need to do is print them out. Alright, so let's say syso control space, print them out, name. Alright, and then let's say sysO, control space, and print them out. Sorry, first let's print ID and then print name. Sorry, right, ID and then name. Alright, now the next thing I need to do is flushing the session. It's already done. Alright, now let me print a statement here. Alright, so this is the second query. Control save, and now run this program and see what happens. Run as Java application. See, first our query, the query 1 which we generated or created is same, exactly same as before. Alright, now this is the second query for starting over here. Sorry. Alright, this is the second query starting over here, and if you notice in the second query I'm just selecting ID and name. That is what I require from games. Alright, and it's displaying the data as I required it. It's not selecting anything extra other than what I require. Alright, the second thing we need to know about this is if you want to select only one column, alright, there would be slight change. If you want to select one column, the slight change would be you don't need to create object array, simply an object would work, and you don't need to specify these numbers, simply an object. Alright, and for understanding I'll show you that too, and let me copy this code. And for selecting only one column, alright, that's going to work like this. Alright, Curie Q3, let's make this Q3. Alright, create Curie, and let's say only name. I don't need the ID, I'm selecting only one column. Alright, and this is going to be L2, then this is going to be Q3, this is going to be L2, and so on. It remains the same. I'm only selecting the name. See, this is what changes. Object array becomes only object, object array again becomes only object, and there's no integer. I'm not selecting the ID, so remove that, and instead of object array again I have only the object. Now I don't need this again, so remove this out. Alright, save this program. That's for only if you want to select only one column. This is the process. Alright, there's a slight change. You don't need to use array if you want to select only one column from a table. Rather, you can use it this way, which is directly an object. No need of what you call array. If you create an object array when you're selecting only one column, you'll get an error, and your objects won't get typecasted into other what you call string, integer, or any kind of type. Alright, so let's save this. Alright, iterator I2 it has to be, because iterator I1 is already there, and I have to specify this is I2 too, and I2 over here too. Alright, save this. Now there it should work perfectly. Run as Java application, and now let's see what do we get. There you go, this is the second query. Alright, let's change something here. Instead of having it print this is the second query, let's say this is a third query. Alright, third query over here. Save this and run this again so we can understand the code better, and run as Java application. Alright, so first query loaded everything, displayed everything. Alright, the first query, and this is the second query which actually loaded only ID and name and displayed ID and name, and then this is a third query which only displayed the names. Alright, I commented this out. Alright, because I commented this two statements out, this time when I got the result, the first query actually displayed only two elements, one ID and name. But now since I uncommented the statements out, alright, run query, run as Java application again. This time it should work correct, And alright, see, the first query loaded everything and displayed everything, that is 4 columns and ID, name, space and type. And this is the second query, and in second query I'm only loading ID and name, and so I got ID name. Alright, wait. Alright, ID name, and this is the third query where I just loaded my name, select name, and it just has the names. So this is pretty much it, guys, and that's all for Hibernate query language and for selecting data. And I'll post more tutorials, and thank you for watching. Good luck learning.